Hi, my name is Connell. I'm here from CERT, which is a federally funded research and development center at the Software Engineering Institute of Carnegie Mellon University. As my bio reports, I've been there for, been there 17 years now. Started off in the School of Computer Science and branched off into the cybersecurity division about 7 years ago. So I'm here to talk to you, specifically, I should go back and say this, delight and responsibility. So a little bit of a twist. I work for CMU and the CERT division, predominantly with the Digital Intelligence and Investigations division. We partner, the majority of our work is with law enforcement, federal law enforcement organizations, but we also work with the Department of Homeland Security and other divisions of government, as well as in the private sector, to deal with cybersecurity incidents response, and we create many, many different things for them, whether they are applications, a service, an artifact, whatever the solution demands. So today, I'm talking to you about a specific tool that we developed that had absolute unintended consequences of a benefit of not just solving the problem, but also providing a feed forward into that solution that was unanticipated. So the motivating scenario, I'm not allowed, I had to put this through our export control, so I'm not allowed to tell you the exact situation in which we conducted and created the tool or did our requirements gathering based on the initial scenario. But the event was in September of 2011. What had to happen was a law enforcement, a federal law enforcement organization needed to create and a coordinated response to a really big event that was going to happen in New York. There were over 1,900 security and law enforcement personnel that needed to report up to to various law enforcement from the municipality level to the state level and to the federal level, what their findings were of advances of sites that all of these events were going to take place. And all of this was going to take place within a 2-week window of time. What we needed to do was to create a way for them to communicate, to collaborate, and to have digital convergence. So what we did and what our project goals were in anticipation of this event was to start to go through all the research toolkit that you would in order to create this tool. So we wanted to create an assessment and situational awareness tool for incident response so that anything that came across performing these advances before the event happened could be recorded, and if there was a threat detected, that it could be mitigated. We also wanted to maintain the velocity of incident response, meaning if there was something that was found in one of the sites, we would automatically be able to check in one of the other 86 sites that these events were going to take place. Specifically though, because risk takes many, many different forms, we were talking about what we saw as critical systems protection. So that being of surveillance, wireless surveillance, HVAC, elevators, you know, the Department of Public Water was being looked at, police stations and how they were going to respond to a transportation or security division, something that was actually physical. So this was looking at not just the sort of IDS detection systems, but also physical systems and how you would physically walk from a car to a podium inside of a conference and speak, and any system that might affect you in that path. and we wanted to be able to communicate the results of that system assessment in a way that everybody could see the information in real time. The stakeholders for this project were the incident security response teams and that we had at CMU already and what tools they were using. So we were looking at things like Silk for network traffic. We were also looking at things that, or tools that were at CERT that would detect other vulnerabilities, vulnerability reports. So we were looking at artifacts that our own institute had and could provide to us. We also were working with partners at Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute, and specifically with Dr. Eric Nyberg. Have any of you heard of the Watson computer that appeared on Jeopardy that was able to, yes, beat, I think his name is Ken Jennings. Sadly, I don't know the human's name, but I know the computer's name. In any case, Professor Nyberg helped us to create the data model and the expert system in order to, so that the machine learning capability could learn about the data as it was being entered, as, again, that feed-forward principle of learning from the data and then automatically splitting off and finding out more information about any vulnerability that was indeed detected. The project requirements for the tool that we actually created, it had to be usable, it had to be standardized, it had to be functional, scalable, technical, and we also had to ensure that it was going to be adopted by specifically the law enforcement organization that was sponsoring the tool, but also for that tool to then work across all federal law enforcement organizations. More importantly, no, not just federal law enforcement, we wanted to make sure that we were creating something that would work for security incident responders, any security incident responder who was conducting assessments, so that indeed this could expand beyond just federal law enforcement. So what we found and hoped for in order to do this work, and I'll talk about just a little bit of the methods that we use soon, but what we wanted to do and what our charge is, as well as the charter of the Software Engineering Institute, is to improve the state of practice. So we wanted a workflow that was non-domain specific, that would easily transfer to other domains, so maybe not just advances that you were doing on a site search or survey, but indeed perhaps another domain where you could take this tool and use it for, say, somebody who's doing an assessment of vulnerabilities at any agency, organization. And the reliance on experts having to physically do that and instead empowering a tool with somebody who isn't necessarily a subject matter expert, maybe somebody that was being trained up and onboarded to work for an organization, could use and basically have somebody like a subject matter expert there in the room, feeding them the information and asking the questions that they would need. So basically almost being a low-level incident security responder, they're having guidance questions, asking the right ones of that site facility, and having sort of a mentor or expert in the room with them as they're using the tool. So I'm not really here to sell you a tool, just so you know. This is not what we're here for. What we're here for is to learn from the experience and really the data model and making basically the repeatable process of being able to create that expert in the room model for security and incident response. We wanted to make sure indeed that that was repeatable and standardized. We wanted to add value and capability to that person so that they didn't have to have necessarily somebody there teaching them on site, that they could have that representation just using something that would essentially run in any browser. And we wanted to make sure that the results of the guidance questions and feed-forward information could be applied really as security awareness in any situation. So that being not domain specific was essential. So any field needing risk management, not just incident response. The domain here, specifically though, was indeed information systems. This includes specialized systems, industrial process control systems, like I said, wireless surveillance, HVAC, electrical, telephone switching, branch exchange, PBX systems if you're familiar, environmental control systems, even if there were environmental sensors in the area, so you could see particulates, temperature. We basically were taking all of the information, all the data that we could collect and trying to create a response that would be in real time. So this may be public or private systems, by the way. This wasn't always organizations. The information systems types, general term that encompasses several types of control systems. Distributed file systems, which specifically DCS, I believe, is the term that we used as the acronym for the tool for short. We also talked about file systems that allow access to files from multiple hosts, network information systems, intrusion detection systems, as well as SCADA systems. So supervisory control over larger areas or blocks of the sites that were in New York. So a SCADA system or a supervisory control and data acquisition system, such as the Department of Public Works or Water and Sewer. The challenges that we had. At the time, they were doing this on pen and paper. So there were essentially, at these 87 sites, there were 5 agents or law enforcement officials at each one of those sites. So the information collected looked a lot like this, because it was literally collected on pen and paper, typed up, and then submitted to their supervisors. Yes, I did my assessment. Here it is. That's really hard to act on. So what we did, we started to clarify the systems, take the data that we were given, start tracking it, see where the commonalities are, start basically creating a hierarchy of this information. The next step after that, in the scenarios that we created, we had personas based on those interviews. So the people that were collecting the information as well as the actual systems that they were collecting the information about. And then what we wanted to do was to create focus statements from that information collected and provide it to the people that were making the decisions. So we were creating personas, stakeholders, as well as collecting the data itself and recording the process along the way. The next step of this, we needed to categorize which systems and create a prioritized list. So which systems are the most potential threats? We recorded those, put those at the top, as well as identified a partner to who would mitigate that threat in that system. After that, we then created what we called the final assessment. So taking all this crazy sort of information and process and people, and then slowly starting to carve out the process from that particular, or what we found to be the best repeatable situation. So the pain points along the way. The first, as I said before, they were using pen and paper to record the information. Not a great way to act on data. And not a great way also to map it to the right audience, reporting the information of where the problems were. They each use differing terminology. One person would say video surveillance. Another one would say there's a wireless camera that pans and zooms. Another would say there is no wireless camera here, although they actually did have a wireless surveillance system. So we had to basically take all this different terminology and start to make it into something that could be actionable for the machine language processing to run. After that, we also ran into the problem of being unable to access any historical data. So any of the data that was already recorded from the advances prior to us starting to work on this project, we wanted to get all that information in and also streamline it so it become terms that we could act on. The next the pain point of lack of situational awareness. Once we had all this information collected, how are we going to act on it? And after talking to many users, conducting surveys and contextual inquiries, we created personas based on the interviews that were doing it the best, that were doing it in the ways that they knew specifically what systems to act on, they knew what the vulnerabilities were, and who to contact. So basically, we modeled it after looking at all of these different agents talking and working with 87 different sites. And the cumbersome report generation, believe it or not, was the most painful process. Trying to tell anyone in any organization specifically how they're going to report is a real problem, apparently. And I don't mean just PDF or Word documents. I mean, every organization has its own standard operating procedure or claims that it has its own standard operating procedure, but really it's just this sort of non-intuitively obvious way of getting the right information to the right people. You kind of have to know it and be in there for quite a while before you know what that process is to that particular organization. So we tried to standardize that as well. The methods that we used. Started off with a literature review, created ourselves as users following the agents around conducting the advances, and saw what was the largest area for project contribution. In immersing ourselves as users, I'm intentionally, no offense again, I'm not allowed to show you the actual pictures of any of the advances we went on, so I'm showing you one that we did at the FedEx Center in Washington, D.C., which was not the event that I'm talking about specifically, but it was, in principle, the same type of situation where we followed the agents doing and conducting the site surveys so that we could see how they did their work and how they recorded the information and how they acted on it. Through that, we showed how much of their information was tacit knowledge that they had in their head that they didn't have recorded anywhere in any of the documentation or artifacts that they collected. They also, we could observe them in the field this way through the immersive research, and we could also find out how they were going to meet the needs of those vulnerabilities and address them. We also did a lot of research mapping. Honestly, we did a lot of this simply because the terminology differences. That was one of the other biggest challenge after telling an organization how to report things, normalizing the data and creating terminology that was actionable and understood by everyone was the second biggest problem. So we identified some commonalities across these observations, and we are able to create the workflow as well as the terminology and link terminology so that the machine learning processes could run and provide similar information, whether we reported a wireless camera system or surveillance system or they have no video, but we know through other reports that they actually do have a video surveillance system. It would basically provide you the same information on how to mitigate that risk. Created some concept validation. This is just a cartoon of the site because, again, apologies for the rudeness of the cartoon, but it's basically just showing you the process and how we went about creating that process from the information. Once we came up with a process, we had the agents actually walk it. We had them go and do a couple of sites using this process before we gave them the tool to make sure that we had the right order, sequence of events. After that, we did some usability testing, received feedback a lot from the requests of the users telling us, hey, this step is incorrect. You've got this out of sequence. We need to do this first before we can do this. For instance, you want to talk to the intrusion detection system people after you talk to the network people because they contradict each other. So we basically found out nuances in the order of the steps that we had to do or perform the advances. The solution for this, right now it's being called the CERT assessment tool. This is an abstracted name of the real tool. Again, we really want to create something that could be used and applied to multiple domains. So this step and the data model and process I'm going to show you is just slightly different than the actual tool that we created for the sponsor that funded the research. And we do work with federal law enforcement clients to develop this. It is browser-based and basically allows you to step through this process and get the real-time scrape from the National Vulnerability Database information that pushes to you what vulnerabilities are currently recorded about systems that you're actually working on at that time. The data model, I apologize, I'm a little over 10. Few minutes, okay. So the data model, first you have the assessment, then you have multiple sites that would feed into that assessment report. After that, you would collect all these information about the systems for each of those sites and the system attributes. So all the attributes of those systems and how they're deployed in that particular site has a custom sort of list, and it all feeds up and up and up until we get an assessment for that particular event. So an event can have multiple sites, multiple systems, and I'm sure you can see very quickly it expands into a really huge tree, sort of like the roots of a tree where, you know, if you've ever tried to dig up a tree and get rid of them, you see what I'm talking about, right? It quickly gets out of hand. The interface for this, as I said, it does run in a browser. What it does is it creates a way to, as you enter in the systems and record how it's being deployed, what the risks are, how the controls are applied. It allows you basically a couple of ways to mitigate that risk and create your security response plan. The systems area allows you situational awareness for each one of those individual sites. It allows multiple people to work on a site, so collaboratively, and enables flexibility and recursion of system attributes. So if somebody's working on a site in Midtown, Manhattan, and another person's working on a site downtown in Wall Street, and they come across the same version of the intrusion detection system that's used at different Marriotts, but this Marriott is applying a control this way, and this Marriott is applied a control this way. It allows you to record both, and then allows the agents to tell one another they're using contradictory methods here, and we know that one of them is secure and the other isn't. It allows you a real-time guidance of, please tell them to, you know, turn off remote access capability during this particular time. And that is the control that would get recorded, and then the next person doing a site assessment would be able to apply the same security mitigation. The interview text that appears in the center part where they record the information basically allows the storage of the interview data. And again, as I said before, because everybody uses different terminology to type up basically the same type of risk, we would then normalize that information in the section so that they weren't held back from recording the information in real time during the interview, because that actually was a problem for them to be inhibited or have to fill out forms that would adhere to the information. It would take them 3 times as long to do their work, and they resented it. So allowing us to just collect the information via free-form interviews did not put, or was not an impediment to them and their workflow, and indeed we could then take that information and normalize it after the fact, therefore not slowing down the process of conducting the advance. And the guidance questions, again, providing runtime support. So if they entered in a system and they didn't enter in a corresponding risk or control, if that information wasn't put in, we would feed forward them, hey, did you know about this risk with this particular system? And that way they felt like they were doing the best work that they possibly could and doing it in the actual moment rather than going back, filing the report, you know, sending it to their supervisor. 2 weeks later, they're told, hey, I read your report. Did you know you had the ability to turn this particular wireless access point off? The notifications being real time also, and prompting them, what had amazing benefits of them looking up risks more often than just looking at this as drudgery work. They were actually going out and finding vendor bulletin reports and putting the information in themselves rather than the system finding it for them. And it provided not just the real-time information, but made them a little bit more situationally aware with regard to what risks are out there for intrusion, or not just intrusion systems, but SCADA systems in general. As I said, unintended benefits. If any of you have read recently the benefits psychologically of being helpful or showing gratitude or empathy, we found them to be amazingly valuable here as well. It was pretty phenomenal. The increased adoption of use, especially making it browser-based instead of making a tool that had to run on specific systems, or, I mean, I use a Mac. A lot of these guys actually use Macs also. Having to use a Windows tool would have sucked. They didn't want to use something that was only on a specific operating system or computer. They resented that. Everybody wants the freedom to run on whatever machine they want to run on. That whatever they're going to be productive on, that's what we wanted to benefit and supply. So the adoption of it being used was amazing. The time spent generating advances, we had no idea, but they spent 3 times the amount of time creating these reports than they did before when they did it in Word documents. And we thought that was pretty interesting. We knew that because there was a timer on the actual application. Better results than the original scope. We actually found that it spread into other areas of cybersecurity. In fact, they actually started listing things that we didn't even account for, like, hey, we think this guy's an insider threat. He's been reporting out information. That was unintended based on the tool that we created and the way that the process was stepping the law enforcement officers through the process and creating their reports. They were recording DDoS attacks. They even had a situation where, if anyone's familiar with the term doxing, they said, hey, this guy, we're a little worried about him because he was recently, he was swatted. If you're familiar with the term swatted, where somebody makes a false report and says that there's some home invasion, and that individual was still traumatized from the SWAT attack because it was fake. A SWAT team comes in and holds them there for a number of hours and asks them questions. They were like, we really don't think that he is physically able to do his job right now, and it's not his fault. We just think he needs a little bit more time. They actually put that into the report, and it therefore became, sort of a psychological profile almost of how you want to make sure that the team that is responding to anything that would be an attack that would affect a lot of people in a site would actually account for things that we never intended for them to put that in there. But it's actually not a bad idea to think, boy, everybody should be pretty emotionally stable when they're responding to something of a visit that held the lives of, say, all of these people in this room right now. We wouldn't want the people responsible for the security of it to be impaired in any way. So the cybersecurity threat searches were self-fulfilling in that they were putting in more information that we even requested. It has been expanded to law enforcement. It's now being part of the training for, or being considered for part of the training for FLETC, as well as other law enforcement training through the LEAP portal, and the idea of just having increased helpfulness and empathy and helping one another do their work a lot better. The applicable domains, I hope that through talking about this, you see how it could be expanded to other areas. It has already been expanded to insider response or incident response, insider threat, cybersecurity threat searches. So the vulnerability team, our vulnerability team at CERT is using parts of this as well. Insurance claims investigations, medical case evaluations, and law enforcement in general. I am 10 minutes over, and I do apologize. My timing says that I'm at 29, but in any case, the focus in the end is desired future states. As a research and development center, it is our charter, our charge to create things that improve the state of practice of what's out there and being used currently. We feel that indeed we improved their process, not just their process though, but then we were able to amplify it to other domains. And as an agency or an organization requesting a better solution, we know that we need much more of the actual immersive research, finding out what the process is and unique to an individual, not necessarily at the sponsor level, but at the people that are doing the work level. We found that we've had a lot of really great feedback with regard to this was representative of the people doing the work instead of the people that were getting the eventual report of the work, although they were considered as well. And validate the concept in real-life situations. We learned things even after we thought we nailed it with regard to the process that were absolutely incorrect. You have to take whatever that process is and rework it through the people that are going to be using it to validate that you have the correct order of what that process needs to be recorded and how it's applied. I apologize for saying that to a room full of security professionals, but I'm always amazed at how often I have to continually learn that lesson myself. And keep your rapid prototypes focused. There's no point in that whole concept validation stage that looked like a cartoon on paper. Basically, that was just taking paper prototypes or quick little flash demonstrations or flex apps and walking them through the steps and making sure that it was correct before we went full-fledged into creating a real solution that ran in a browser. We were able to validate that they were the right steps. Any questions?